Are you not sure where to go when it comes to exercise selection for building your Strongman program? This list of 20 movements is a great starting point. Hey everybody, Coach Mark here, and before we dive into today's topic, make sure to find me over on Instagram as Coach Mark Estrabio. Also, I offer one-to-one coaching. It's what I do full-time, and the odds are very good I would love to work with you. With that being said, let's get into it. When it comes to exercise selection and building a strongman program, it can honestly get overwhelming really quickly. But what I found is if you stick to the 20 that I'm going to talk about today, it's a great starting point for any well-rounded program. It's not an exhaustive list, but it gives you something very useful to work backwards from. You want to think about building a really wide foundation that way you can support high peaks of strength and performance, making this more accessible for most of us. That said, this does not replace your specialty training with the actual implements. This is more just your general developmental work you're going to do outside of event training. It supports your event training, it does not replace it. We'll break it up into four main categories. You're going to have your pressing type movements and accessories thereof, back and upper body pulling movements, general lower body strength movements, as well as arm and shoulder support exercises. So first and foremost is going to be either an axle or a barbell press, and this could be done strict or push press style. Personally, if you have access to it, I will use an axle over a barbell for most any pressing movement, as I find it's a lot easier on my wrists. I like being able to use that false grip a bit more safely. I find it can keep my elbows tucked so I get a lot more tricep recruitment. But if you don't have access to the axle, the barbell is going to work really nicely. Again, this is just a good all-around basic pressing developer. Next up would be all forms of log pressing, be it strict or push. As a quick aside, when it comes to ratios in between your strict log and your log push press, you should be able to do somewhere around 85% or so strict versus your push. I actually do have a live where I dive a bit further into these ratios for various accessory movements, but regardless, this is just a good number to keep in mind, and a strict log will almost always carry over to your push press log. However, if you're stricting a lot more than you're pushing, odds are good you need to work on your technique with your leg drive. The 45-degree inclined paused board press, or as I call it, the Don press, named in honor of Shane Reese with MST, who is indeed the log Don. This is a really good mid-range pressing developer. It's also really nice if you're doing a lot of push pressing on other days or pushing your squats and deads. You can use this to help build your overhead pressing prowess while giving your low back and your legs a bit of a breather. Close grip bench press obviously is a classic from the powerlifting circles, very important for building your tricep strength. Zydrunas Savickas at a seminar I was at recently said this is one of his favorite tricep developers, and I remember hearing somewhere, but do not quote me on this, it could be apocryphal, that he once said whatever you're aiming for on the log, you should be able to close grip bench press that weight for sets of 5 to 8. Then after that is the floor press for the same reason. It's just going to build really good tricep strength, but especially in that mid-range because it does put you at a 90-degree bend, which is similar to where you're going to peter out on the log when you're trying to press it. And for our final movement will be a behind-the-neck press. This is one I really like doing seated, especially with an axle. It's just a bit more comfortable on the neck. This not only helps build raw pressing power, but also helps us preserve our shoulder mobility. This is one that I think slots in really nicely as a second press on any given day. And another big benefit to it as well is it keeps you from pressing with a super flared rib cage and actually has you pressing in a more neutral pelvic and rib alignment. That way you're going to really preferentially load not only the anterior delts but also the side delts and triceps as well. You can't just rely on arch wherein you might normally try to transfer it to your pecs by doing that big arch in the low back like when you do a standing log press, for example. You know, in terms of benefits, it's pretty obvious here. Overhead dominance is mandatory in strongman. There's a saying, win the press, win the show. It's not always the case, but usually the people who do well in the pressing events tend to follow through the rest of the events, whereas someone who might smoke the deadlift event could be taken out to the woodshed on something like a pressing event. Your incline and close grip work is going to be really good for your tricep and lockout power. Your behind the neck press as well as your floor press, those help kind of attack specific weak links in your kinetic chain. And rotate implements, use a Swiss bar, use a barbell, use an axle, use a log. Change the pressure gradients a little bit and just have some fun with it. Now, when it comes to back and upper pulling, think movements such as a bent over barbell or trap bar row, one arm rows of all kinds, whether it be croc rows, dumbbell rows with a little bit of body English, chest supported rows on the cable, whatever you have access to, as well as trap 3 raises and rear delt raises. Now, the benefits here are pretty darn obvious. When it comes to rows, that's going to be upper back size and strength. That's also really going to help you in terms of your pick when it comes to loading events such as Atlas stones or sandbags. The trap 3 is good for posture and shoulder stability, as are the rear delts. And also, it's one of those things where if you have big, strong rear delts, it also helps with just sort of getting your torso a bit more rigid so you're not folding on those heavy deads. Coupled with big rows, you're going to be able to hold a much more powerful position so you're not doing the worm when you come off the ground. In general, this movement series is just going to have a ton of carryover to your stones, your yoke, your carries, and your overhead press. Now for lower body strength, squats of all kind, but especially the front squat, the high bar and SSB squat are going to be your best friend. I do want to have an honorable shout out to the camber bar squat. This is one I like to rotate in, especially if I'm training for a yoke event coming up. Reason being because those cambers do swing a little bit. You get some of that bracing demand that would come in very handy. Deadlifts of all types, because you're a strongman. You have to deadlift. And that's barbell, that's axle, that's trap bar. All of these things are going to have carryover. Walking lunges or split squats. And then a deadlift stance good morning, I think, is something that's kind of underrated. Doing that with either an SSB or even from a Zercher hold. If you do it with a Zercher, that one's actually really useful for improving your loading. You can do these to pins or you can do them free. Either one's really good. And then last but not least, a deadlift stance leg press. So when it comes to training in this section, you want to think your posterior chain, obviously, that's your event efficiency, that's your moving events as well as your deadlift and loading capabilities. Your split stance or lunge work, that's going to be really good for your single leg stability, loading, carries. In those situations where maybe you have to stagger step a little bit, you lose your balance, you slip, this is sort of your armor, right? You think in a situation when that happens, you're better off having strong single leg rather than only training bilaterally because it's a good insurance policy. Now squats, obviously, that's just good quad and leg drive. You'll notice I did not have low bar squats in there. They're a fine exercise. I personally just find that the low bar squat is one I would only really use if there was something like a squat event coming up. Whereas for general development, especially for a strongman athlete, I think a high bar, SSB, or front squat is going to make more sense. And then the good morning, that's just going to help reinforce your deadlift mechanics, build a very strong hinge pattern, which is going to carry over to your loading as well. And it's worth mentioning, if you are a very strong deadlifter, you might benefit more from good mornings rather than RDLs, just because you can get a lot more stimulus using a lower load. So that helps you save some resources when it comes time to recovery between your workouts. Now, when it comes to arm and shoulder support, there are so many movements you can use to train the arms, obviously. These are just a few of my personal favorites. The overhead tricep extension is really beneficial for the strongman athlete. While tricep press downs are incredible, skull crushers are great, this one is going to have a bit more specificity to the sport, so it's definitely one worth putting in your rotation. You can do this on a straight bar, you can do this with the rope handles, you can do this on an easy curl bar. It's actually one I really like with a Swiss bar as well. Then after that, some incline curls as well as spider curls. That way you're training your biceps both from a lengthened and squeezed position. Bicep injuries are incredibly common in strongman. Having strong biceps is something important. If you're flipping a tire and it slips a little bit, again, it's an insurance policy. If the bicep is weak in isolation in a situation like that, it's more likely to get hurt. And then lastly, some lateral raises, just because, big strong delts are never a bad idea for an overhead athlete. So as I alluded to before, strong biceps, that's protection during stones and carries. Also, it's going to help you keep those implements in close when you're picking them up for the load. Stronger triceps, obviously mandatory for good lockouts. The laterals will just be there for shoulder stability and long-term joint health. The high rep work is going to help you stay in the game long-term. Because what it does is it not only puts blood into our muscles, it helps strengthen the connective tissue over time. So sets of 20 to 30, use some bands, things like that can be very beneficial for you. Quick sidebar, not a doctor, this is just observational experience. And then last but not least, and potentially most importantly, this kind of work helps with jackedness. There's a lot of guys who can deadlift a ton of weight without looking like they can deadlift that much, but the strongest pressers tend to look like incredible pressers, and that's one of those things where your science-based mindset there is empiricism and observational science. Now, as far as rep ranges go, here's just some boilerplate recommendations for all of your big compound type movements. Think in the 3 to 8 range. For more of the dumbbell/intermediate movements, 6 to 12, isolations 10 to 20, or even beyond, especially if you're using bands. Just get a really good pump. And again, anywhere between 5 and 30, I think is a very viable rep range to change in. You just want to think about the movement itself and loading potential. And here's what that all looks like put together. So this is a sample week for an off-season athlete who's just looking to build more muscle mass overall. Your first day of the week is going to be your lower body developmental day. So we're going to do some front squats, 8 triples, think speed emphasis, Zercher good mornings, 5 sets of 3 to 5, some Zercher reverse lunges, just a couple hard sets each leg, rest, pause, lat pull downs, back extensions, 8x8 method, calf raises, 8x8 method. Day 2 is going to be upper developmental day. We're on that 45-degree incline press. Instead of doing speed work, we're doing 4 sets of 12 to 15 just to accumulate a lot of volume, get a good wide base of support there. Some seated behind the neck axle presses, 3 challenging sets of 5 to 8 reps. A rest pause for the row, some trap 3 raises, press downs, and hammer curls. Then, probably take a day off, right? You don't want to lift more than 2 days in a row in my experience. I'm a big fan of 2 days on, 1 to 2 days off, and then the next 2 days. That way it's No more than 2 days in a row, nor are you taking off more than 2 days in a row with your training. But anyway, so day 3, that's your lower max effort. SSB Hatfield squat is a really great leg developer. You'll hit a heavy set of 5 to 8 for your top set, and then drop about 20% or so, and then do a set of 10 to 12, some RDLs, 3 sets of 8 to 12, or you could even do something like an SSB good morning here, but I did opt for the RDL because in this case, if we're thinking hypertrophy focus, I find that RDLs do allow for a bit more of a stretch. Meadows row, think a set of 20, add a little weight, set of 15 each side, add a little weight, set of 12. A rest pause T-bar row, rest pause deadlift stance leg press, and then knee extensions again using that 20, 15, 12 approach. And then for our max effort upper body day, we're going to have 2 heavy top sets of 5 to 8 on a close grip bench, then a back off set of 10 to 12, some dumbbell arm presses, Lou raises, which is a lateral raise. You're going to come all the way up and get a little rotation over the top. Really great developer there. Some overhead tricep extensions, a rest pause for the axle curl, and then a rest pause for the face pull. And what you'll notice here with the exercise selection is we've picked movements that have a very high stability element. That way you can focus more on output and maximizing strain and tension within the muscle as opposed to just trying to balance and control. For example, something such as a log push press, doing that for sets of 8 to 12 for hypertrophy. Personally, I think that's not necessarily the best move because you're more likely to run into a conditioning bottleneck there, whereas something such as a seated incline press for sets of 12 to 15, you can focus purely on the muscle output. And now here's another option if you're more in the static strength focus side of things. On day 1, you'll do some high bar pause squats, 5 triples, some SSB good mornings, Bulgarian split squats, chin-ups, a deadlift stance leg press, and ab wheel. And the movement selection here is we're picking more, shall we say, basic compound movements. We're not doing as much machine work. We're focusing more on just the athlete moving themselves or moving a heavier load. The second day for our developmental, rather than again speed work, we're just seeing basic sets across with something like a strict log, 5 sets of 3 to 5. The 45-degree incline press makes its appearance again, but we're in a lower rep range. Do a bent over row using the rest pause method, face pulls with the rest pause method. I tend to like rest pause a lot for pulling exercises. Reason being, I find that if I do a lot of sets across, I tend to lose focus. Whereas if I do 1 or 2 really hard sets, I can maximize my output and effort and extract more benefit from these movements as a result. But then after the face pulls, we move to some skull crushers and hammer curls, and that would be our first 2 days of the training week. Then we'll move into our max effort days where it would be a deficit deadlift, think a heavy triple, and then you drop about 15% for 2 sets of 4. Follow that up with Zercher squats, a 1-arm dumbbell row using that 20, 15, 12 approach, a seated cable row, rest pause method, some walking lunges, and weighted sit-ups. Again, 20, 15, 12 approach. And then at day 4 will be that behind the neck press, work into a heavy triple. Then you're going to drop down to 60% of that heavy triple and work back up, taking necessary jumps until you hit a new 5 RMs. It's sort of a double ramp approach there. This is a really fun way to train upper body movements in particular. You could try it with lower body. I personally would never do a double ramp for lower body. I think it'd just fry myself, but hey, your mileage may vary. But then after that, 4 sets of 6 to 8 on a floor press, some upright rows, overhead triceps, little cheek curls, and IYT raises. So you can see here with the static focus, we do have a bit more stability work in there as well because we are chasing heavier loads due to movement selection in the first couple movements there, especially on the max effort. But you can see how with either template here, we're using that list of 20 exercises to get a good baseline, and we can work backwards from it and branch outwards, and it lets you play with it. Again, this isn't to replace everything you're doing in your own program. Just think of this as a nice tool that you can work backwards from to help you make better informed exercise selections when it comes to your programming. But that wraps up everything I've got for you today. Hopefully you found this list of 20 exercises useful. If you have any comments or questions, let me know down below. The best comments and questions are ones I will turn into topic videos. Otherwise, I will see you folks in the next one. Take care.